I overheard my stepdaughter tell her mom it was time to get rid of me. I pretended I didn't hear anything until she prepared my favorite meal for me. She hadn't cooked for me in many years, so I did the unbelievable. What happened next was rather unexpected. I will tell you everything. First, let me quickly thank you for your continuous support. This means a lot to us. If you enjoy the stories we share, kindly subscribe to this channel. It will be great if you can leave a comment on which city you are watching from. We might just give you a shout out in our next story. Today's special shout out goes to Jeremy Winstanley from New York. We are glad you enjoy our stories. Now let's go deeper into the story. I used to think loyalty was like gravity, unseen but dependable, holding everything in place. You put in the work, the time, the sacrifices, and eventually the people around you anchored themselves to that same principle. But the older I got, the more I realized how many people are just waiting for you to let your guard down, smiling with one hand out, the other hiding a knife. My name held weight in business circles, not because I was flashy or born into it, but because I built something real. I ran a logistics firm that turned local deliveries into regional dominance, and eventually into something that got people's attention nationally. I was proud of it. Still am. But all the while, I assumed that success would trickle down into love, that it would buy me safety at home. Turns out, you can buy everything except sincerity, and sometimes, even the family eating at your table is just there to measure the silverware. Angela was the second chapter of my life. My first wife passed away after a long illness, and I never thought I'd love again until she walked into my office selling digital marketing packages. She was sharp, magnetic, 10 years younger, and had a way of making me feel like I wasn't just some tired businessman in a suit. Her daughter, Camille, was already 19 then, standoffish, distant, but polite enough when she needed to be. I tried, God knows I did. Paid for her education, supported her boutique dreams, even gave her a non-voting seat on my company's board as a gesture of goodwill. But she never looked at me as anything other than the obstacle between her mother and whatever inheritance she believed she was owed. I'd gotten used to the cold shoulder, the passive jabs during family dinners, the polite distance. That was normal. What I wasn't ready for was the moment I learned that the women I thought I was protecting, the ones I thought I was providing for, were planning to cut me out like old wallpaper. It happened on a quiet Tuesday evening, around 8:30. I'd just finished reviewing quarterly projections in my study and headed downstairs for a drink of water. That's when I realized I'd left my phone upstairs. Typical. As I came back up the hallway, I heard voices coming from the guest bedroom. Angela's voice, low and anxious, and Camille's sharper, more forceful tone. At first, I wasn't trying to listen. I just froze when I heard my name. It's time to get rid of him, Mom. We've waited long enough. The sentence hit me like a brick to the chest. I didn't breathe, didn't blink, just stood there, my hand on the doorframe, heart crawling up my throat. Angela didn't respond right away. I hoped, foolishly, that she'd shut it down, scold Camille, say something that would unravel the knot forming in my stomach. But instead, I heard her sigh, not in protest, in exhaustion. Camille, we have to be careful. He's not stupid. That was it. No denial. No outrage. Just strategy. That's when the knot in my stomach turned into something else entirely. Ice-cold clarity. This wasn't some offhand remark. This was a conversation they'd had before. Maybe many times. And now, they thought they were close enough to execution that subtlety was no longer needed. Camille wanted me gone. And Angela? She was working out the logistics. I backed away from the door quietly, like someone leaving the scene of a crime. I didn't want to hear more. I couldn't. My hands were trembling, not from fear, but from something more primal. Betrayal, humiliation, rage. But I swallowed all of it. Walked downstairs like nothing happened. Sat on the living room couch, staring at the muted television. I was still sitting there when Angela came down 30 minutes later, acting like everything was normal. She kissed my cheek and asked if I wanted tea. I said sure, and I smiled when I said it. I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake, eyes wide open, listening to her breath softly next to me, wondering how long she'd been waiting to do this. Wondering what get rid of him really meant. Divorce? Discrediting me in front of my board? Or something darker? I'd seen corporate sabotage before. People faking mental health crises to oust a CEO, orchestrating social scandals, even tampering with medication. But that was business. This was home. And now I wasn't sure there was a difference. I kept playing back the conversation in my head. Camille's tone wasn't emotional. It was calculated. Like this was a business strategy, not a family matter. And Angela's response proved she was thinking the same way. That told me this wasn't spontaneous. This was planned. I just didn't know how far along they were, or how much time I had left to act. I thought about confronting them, barging into that guest room and demanding an explanation. But what would that accomplish? They'd deny everything, twist it around, say I misheard. Or worse, speed up their timeline. No, I needed to be smarter than that. If this was a game, then I'd play it on my terms. And the first rule? Never show your hand too early. The next morning, I made breakfast like I always did on Wednesdays. Scrambled eggs, sourdough toast, and fruit on the side. Camille barely touched hers, as usual. Angela complimented the coffee, said she had a client meeting later. I nodded, played the part of the clueless husband, the doting stepfather. But inside, I was documenting every glance, every sentence. I needed to watch them now, closely, and I needed to find out exactly what get rid of him meant. For 3 days, I lived in the shadow of that conversation, every moment tinged with suspicion, every smile from Angela curdling in my gut like spoiled milk. I moved through the house like a ghost with a pulse, pretending not to notice the little changes. Camille suddenly started wearing perfume around the house. Angela cleaned out the liquor cabinet and replaced all the bottles with new ones, even though neither of us drank anything harder than wine. They whispered more, stopped pausing when I entered the room. Camille's laptop was always open, and she'd slam it shut when I walked in, even in the kitchen. That's how you know people aren't just hiding secrets. They're rehearsing them. I kept a poker face, but inside, my mind was a war room. I played out every possibility. Maybe they were planning to frame me, plant something on my devices. Or maybe Camille was trying to convince Angela to poison me and make it look like a heart attack. I wasn't being paranoid. I was being thorough. You don't get to the top of an industry like mine without learning to trust instincts over optimism. Optimism gets people like me killed. Instincts keep you alive. And my instincts were screaming. The twist came that Friday night. I came home early from a board meeting to find Camille in the kitchen, humming. Not just humming, but actually cheerful. She turned around and said, "Hey, I made something special tonight. Figured we haven't done a real family dinner in a while." That alone should have raised alarms. Camille hadn't so much as handed me a napkin in years, let alone cooked a full meal. But there she was, apron on, hands greasy, 3 pots bubbling on the stove. Angela appeared behind her with plates in her arms, smiling like a politician. "She made your favorite, babe, honey garlic lamb chops." Now, if this had happened a week earlier, I might have smiled like a fool. But now I understood exactly what this was. It wasn't nostalgia. It wasn't peace. It was a performance. And they were hoping I'd be too touched, or too stupid, to notice. But I noticed everything. I noticed how Camille watched me from the corner of her eye as I took off my coat. I noticed how Angela kept nervously adjusting the cutlery, wiping down already clean plates. And most of all, I noticed the smallest tell. Camille only plated 2 dishes. Hers and mine. Angela was planning to eat later, or so she claimed. "I had a heavy lunch," she said. "I'll just keep you 2 company." Right. I sat at the table and took in the scene. Candlelight. Cloth napkins. Camille even poured me a glass of Pinot, which she remembered I only drank on Sundays. "Thought we'd open the good stuff," she said, eyes bright, voice soft. "Just wanted to say thanks for everything you've done for us." For a moment, I stared at the plate in front of me. Juicy lamb chops, seared just right, the glaze thick and fragrant. Roasted sweet potatoes. Grilled asparagus. I almost laughed. If this wasn't bait, it was the most theatrical coincidence in recent history. So I played along. I waited until Camille got up to check something in the oven. The second her back turned, I swapped the plates. Clean, smooth, just like a magician palming a coin. Angela was on her phone again. Didn't see a thing. Camille came back, sat down, and smiled. "Dig in," she said. I did. Slowly. The meat was perfect. Seasoned exactly how I liked it. Garlic forward, just a hint of rosemary. Camille took a bite of what she thought was mine and chewed carefully. She didn't say much after that. Just watched me, eyes flicking every time I lifted my fork. Angela tried to keep conversation going, asking about my next trip to Atlanta. I answered vaguely, letting my words hang while I studied them both. After dinner, Camille excused herself and went straight upstairs. No cleanup, no conversation, just vanished. Angela stayed behind, fiddling with her wine glass, then turned to me. "That was nice, wasn't it?" she asked, voice light but tight at the edges. I nodded. "Real nice. Tell Camille she's got a future in cooking." That night, I wrote everything down in my private notebook: timing, ingredients, reactions. I labeled it like a case file: dinner incident, suspected tampering. I even noted the swapped plate and where I'd stored the leftovers. Just in case. You don't go into battle without documentation. And now, I knew I was at war. 2 days later, the first signs showed. It started with Camille forgetting simple things: where she put her keys, whether she'd taken her vitamins. Then came the tremors. Slight at first. Her hands jittered when she picked up her phone. By day 3, she was accusing the house staff of spying on her. Said someone had replaced her shampoo with acid. Angela pulled me aside in a panic. "She's not acting like herself," she whispered. "I don't know what's wrong with her." I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then I remembered the candlelight dinner, the fake gratitude, the plan to get rid of him. No, this wasn't karma. This was evidence. Proof that I'd been right to suspect them. Proof that I wasn't crazy. And now that the poison, or whatever they used, was in her system, the mask was slipping. Angela begged me to take Camille to a specialist. I said we should wait a few more days. "Might be stress," I said. "She's always been a little high-strung." But I was watching closely. Her symptoms weren't random. They were the exact kind of disorientation and paranoia you'd expect from neurological tampering. The kind someone might sneak into a meal hoping to debilitate an aging husband. Just enough to question his leadership, his mental clarity, maybe even force early retirement. But that plate had gone to Camille, and now she was unraveling in real time. On the 4th night, Camille had a full meltdown, screaming in the backyard at 3 in the morning about invisible wires in the grass. Angela was sobbing, calling her brother for advice, pacing the kitchen like a woman on the edge. And me? I was calm, collected, observing. Because now, the next move was no longer mine. It was hers. It's a strange thing to witness madness in someone you once knew. Stranger still when that madness is self-inflicted. Camille, the same young woman who once rolled her eyes at every sentence I spoke, who carried herself like the world owed her interest on her birthright, now stood in the middle of the kitchen barefoot, her eyes darting like she was tracking ghosts. Her hair was a mess. She hadn't showered in 2 days, and she kept wringing her hands like they were wet even though they were bone dry. "He's watching me," she whispered. "He knows everything I'm doing." When I asked who, she looked me dead in the eye and said, "You know who. Don't play dumb." Angela tried to explain it away as exhaustion. "She's just been stressed lately," she told me, though her voice cracked halfway through the sentence. "Too much on her plate. Maybe a vitamin deficiency. We should take her in." But there was panic in her eyes now, real panic. The kind that blooms when a plan starts to eat itself from the inside. Camille hadn't just lost her composure. She was cracking from the core. And deep down, Angela knew why. She just couldn't bring herself to say it. I played dumb, of course. I nodded along, furrowed my brow with concern, even offered to drive them to urgent care. But Angela refused. "Let me take her," she said. "I don't want her to get upset in the car." What she meant was, "I don't want her to say something dangerous in front of you." And she was right to be afraid. Because Camille's condition wasn't just physical. It was moral. Whatever they'd slipped into that plate, whatever concoction was meant to slow me down, dull my edges, make me question my own reality, had started to turn on them. I didn't need to retaliate. The poison had done that for me. By the end of the week, Camille could barely string a sentence together. She spoke in loops, forgot where she was mid-conversation, and started accusing Angela of betrayal. "You told me it'd be fine," she shouted one night, loud enough to rattle the windows. "You said he'd be too slow to notice." I heard every word from the hallway outside her bedroom. I didn't flinch, just recorded the date and time in my journal and went back to my study. Let them unravel. Let the truth leak out on its own. The confession came not long after that. 2 weeks, to be exact. Camille had been admitted to a private psychiatric clinic under a fake name. Angela claimed it was to protect her reputation. But we both knew the real reason was damage control. She didn't want anyone asking why her daughter was hallucinating and convulsing less than a month after a suspiciously gracious dinner with a man who held her financial future in his hands. I expected Angela to start playing the long game again. Silence, control, legal maneuvering. But instead, she broke. It happened late at night. I was in my home office finishing some minor restructuring plans when I heard a knock on the door, soft, hesitant. Angela walked in, robe tied tight around her waist, eyes swollen from crying. She didn't speak at first. Just stood there, wringing her hands like Camille had, breathing like she was trying to hold something in. I let the silence stretch, watched her unravel slowly. Finally, she said it. We didn't mean for it to go this far. I didn't say a word. I just leaned back in my chair and watched her squirm. It was Camille's idea, she said, voice trembling. She thought if you were incapacitated, even temporarily, the board would see her as a stronger option. She wanted to fast-track the succession plan. She said you were getting too rigid, that you'd never let go. And you? I asked. Angela's lip trembled. I didn't think she'd go through with it. I didn't know she'd actually. She stopped, wiped her eyes. She said it was just a mild sedative. Something to confuse you. Just enough to make people question your judgment. But I swear I didn't know she'd use that much. So there it was. Not just intent. Not just betrayal. But execution. They hadn't just talked about getting rid of me. They'd tried. And Angela, for all her tears and stammering, had sat by and watched it unfold. Maybe she didn't stir the poison herself, but she set the table. She welcomed it into our home. And now, with her daughter unraveling in a hospital bed, she came to me hoping for grace. I told her to sit down. She did, hesitantly. I slid a document across the desk, divorce papers I'd had my lawyer draft a week prior. You're going to sign this, I said, voice low and steady. And tomorrow morning, you're going to make a full statement to the police. Angela's face crumbled. Please, she whispered. You don't have to ruin my life. I was scared. I was wrong. But I never wanted to hurt you. You didn't, I said. Not really. But you stood by and watched someone else try. That's worse. She begged. On her knees, literally. Tears soaking into the carpet, hands clutching mine like they used to when she was the woman I thought I loved. But I didn't flinch. Not this time. The part of me that would have melted at that sight was gone. Burned away by every whispered plan, every fake smile, every carefully laid trap they thought I was too blind to see. She signed the papers. And the next morning, I made the call. There was no satisfaction in pressing charges. No quiet thrill, no vindication, just necessity. I didn't wake up that morning thinking, today I'll destroy my wife's life. I woke up thinking, today I finally stop letting people walk through mine like it's their hallway. Angela had made her choice. She aligned herself with someone who tried to erase me. Not kill me. Maybe, but erase me. Break me down mentally, inch by inch, until I became a stumbling shadow in my own home. They weren't planning a death. They were planning a decline. And they were betting on the world looking the other way. I made the call at 9:06 a.m., sitting at the breakfast table where I had once proposed to her. The same table where Camille had smiled as she plated my special dinner. The detective on the line didn't ask many questions, just confirmed my identity, the report I'd filed the previous week, and told me to expect a visit before noon. By 11:48 a.m., 2 plainclothes officers were in my living room reviewing the confession Angela had signed the night before. I handed over the audio file I had secretly recorded during our conversation. I hadn't planned to do it that way, but something about the way she cried, so convincingly, so rehearsed, made me hit record halfway through. Call it instinct. Call it insurance. Either way, it paid off. She was arrested quietly. No cuffs, no shouting, no drama. Just a knock on the door while she was in the upstairs guest room packing. She thought I was letting her leave with dignity. That was her last comfort. When the officers introduced themselves, she looked at me, betrayed, like I had broken our trust. I met her gaze with something colder than anger. Peace. I was done playing the fool. I watched as she whispered something to the officers, then nodded and walked out with them. Her suitcase remained behind. So did her perfume, and the faint trace of a life that was never real to begin with. By sunset, the news had started to spread. Quietly at first, whispers among board members, curious emails from business partners. One of my senior VPs called and said, "I heard something crazy, man. Tell me it's not true." I didn't sugarcoat it. "It's true," I said, "and it's worse than what you've heard." That's when the fallout began. Not just for Angela, but for me, too. Because when someone tries to sabotage you, there's always a trail of people who wondered if they were right. People who resented you. People who saw your stability as arrogance, your success as theft. They crawl out when the ground shakes, like insects from a cracked wall. The next board meeting was brutal. I walked in, folder in hand, legal documents ready, and saw the faces of men and women I'd mentored, promoted, even bailed out of financial trouble. Some looked supportive, others skeptical. That's when I realized betrayal isn't just a private wound, it's a public infection. People start to question everything. If his own wife turned on him, what does that say about him? That's how the corporate world thinks. Cold, practical, disloyal. I addressed the board with the calm of a man who had nothing left to lose. I explained the situation in full, recorded confession, medical documentation from Camille's sudden hospitalization, timeline of events, and my decision to involve law enforcement. I didn't hide my pain, but I didn't bleed, either. That distinction mattered. They needed to see a man who was wronged, not a man who'd lost control. When I finished, there was silence. Then a slow, deliberate nod from the chairman. "You did the right thing," he said. "We'll support you through the investigation." Support came, but so did the gossip. Online forums speculated wildly. Anonymous emails accused me of staging the whole thing. A disgruntled former intern posted on LinkedIn, saying the toxicity in my leadership style was likely what drove Angela and Camille to the edge. My PR team moved quickly, but I let most of it stand. Why? Because sometimes silence is stronger than denial. And anyone who knew me, really knew me, didn't need a press release to understand who I was. Angela's lawyer reached out within days, begging to negotiate a lighter outcome. She wanted to avoid prison. "She's willing to cooperate," they said. "She's remorseful. This was her daughter's doing more than hers." I told them I'd consider it, after a full deposition. I sat across from her one final time, lawyers flanking us on both sides, a court reporter transcribing every word. She looked thinner, paler, like the truth had started to feed on her instead of the other way around. "I didn't want to hurt you," she whispered. "I just didn't know how to stop Camille once she started." "But you didn't try," I replied. "That's the difference." The deposition was submitted to the district attorney. Charges were filed. Angela would face trial for conspiracy and attempted harm through surreptitious means. Camille, meanwhile, remained under psychiatric observation. There were whispers she might be declared unfit for trial. Part of me wanted that, wanted her locked in a place where every shadow reminded her of her own conscience. Another part of me didn't care anymore. They were both gone, and I was still here. I sold the house 2 weeks later. Couldn't stand the silence in those rooms anymore. Every corner reminded me of something false. An anniversary celebrated with stolen glances, a birthday toast made with a knife already hidden beneath the table. I moved into a penthouse downtown, sterile but clean. The kind of place where no one had ever said, "It's time to get rid of him." And just like that, I started over. Courtrooms have a smell, not just of old wood and air conditioning, but of nerves, of sweat just barely masked by expensive perfume and drugstore cologne. It's the smell of people pretending they're fine when their lives are one bad sentence from collapse. I hadn't stepped inside a courtroom in nearly 15 years, not since a licensing dispute with a former partner, but walking through those doors this time felt different. This wasn't about business. This was about betrayal. This was about walking straight into the echo of a plan designed to strip me of everything I had built, with the woman I once called my wife sitting in the defendant's chair like she was a stranger. Angela sat still, dressed in gray slacks and a pale blue blouse, her hair tied back in a low, subdued bun. It was deliberate. She looked soft, non-threatening, even fragile. Her lawyer must have told her to dress like someone you'd feel sorry for. But I didn't. Not for a second. Because I remembered the version of her that stood by while her daughter cooked up an attempt to mentally unseat me. I remembered the glint in her eye when she handed me the wine that night, the fake laugh, the false warmth. She wasn't fragile. She was tactical. And for the first time in her life, she had run out of strategies. The courtroom wasn't packed, but it was full enough. A few members of the press. A couple of Camille's old law school friends whispering in the back row. Two board members I'd known for over a decade sat near the front, watching, silent. No one spoke to me directly. I sat with my lawyer, hands folded in my lap, not out of nervousness, but restraint. I wasn't there for spectacle. I was there for closure. And that meant seeing it through, word by word, charge by charge. The state laid out the case like a slow, steady rain. A known sedative traced in Camille's blood that matched what had been in the kitchen cabinets. The timing of the meal, the swapped plates, the confession, both recorded and signed. Witnesses from the psychiatric facility testified to Camille's delusions, her paranoia, her eventual breakdown. But it was Angela's own voice that did the most damage. When the audio file played in court, you could hear the room tighten. Her exact words, she said it was just a mild sedative. Something to confuse you. That one sentence turned the tide. She wasn't just a bystander. She was complicit. And more importantly, she admitted she knew. Angela didn't testify. Her lawyer advised against it. Instead, she sat silently while the charges were read. Conspiracy to administer a harmful substance. Intent to incapacitate for financial gain. Obstruction of justice. Camille, meanwhile, had been declared temporarily unfit for trial. She remained in psychiatric care under state supervision, which meant Angela took the full weight. I should have felt vindicated. But sitting there, watching her avoid my gaze, I didn't feel joy. I felt the kind of numbness that comes after a long illness finally breaks. You're not happy to be better. You're just relieved it's over. Midway through the proceedings, during a recess, her lawyer approached mine with an offer, a reduced sentence in exchange for a full guilty plea. 10 years with possible parole and 4. I was told I could object, push for the maximum. But I didn't. Not because I wanted to be merciful, but because I didn't need to see her rot. I just needed the world to know the truth. I needed her to say it out loud. So I agreed, on one condition. She had to address the court directly. When the session resumed, Angela stood, voice shaking but clear, and read from a prepared statement. I made a choice to protect someone I loved, even when I knew what she was doing was wrong. I justified it as loyalty. I justified it as family. But the truth is, I failed as a partner. I failed as a wife. I knew Camille planned to incapacitate my husband to gain control of his company, and I did nothing to stop it. For that, I accept full responsibility. No excuses. No tears. Just the weight of her actions laid bare. When she finished, the judge nodded once and delivered the sentence. I didn't hear applause. There wasn't any. No gasps, no shouts, no vindication. Just a quiet finality. A door closing on something that should have ended the moment she decided to pick Camille over me. As we walked out of the courtroom, reporters shouted questions. "Do you forgive her?" One woman asked, shoving a mic in my direction. I stopped, looked her dead in the eye, and said, "I already did. But forgiveness isn't the same as forgetting. Or excusing." Then I got in my car and drove home, not to the house we once shared, but to the one I bought for myself. The one with no ghosts, no lies baked into the floorboards. That night, I sat on the balcony, city lights blinking below, glass of untouched wine beside me. I thought about how easily I could have been the one broken, confused, institutionalized. Thought about how many people would have believed it, how many were already eager to. All it would have taken was one dinner, one slip, one blind spot. But I saw it coming. I listened. I stayed sharp. Angela was behind bars. Camille was in psychiatric care. And me? I was still standing. Forgiveness isn't a door you walk through. It's a boundary you draw and then stand behind, knowing full well the person on the other side doesn't deserve entry anymore. People think it's about release, about grace, about being the better person. But forgiveness is really just a decision not to carry someone else's weight any longer. And after everything that had happened, after the lies, the poison, the courtroom confession, I wasn't going to carry Angela's guilt. I wasn't going to drag Camille's betrayal like a chain. They built their burden. They could wear it. A month after the trial, I visited Angela in prison. Not because I missed her. Not out of love. I needed to see her one last time. Not as my wife, but as the woman who sat by while I was nearly destroyed. The guards brought her out in a pale beige uniform. No makeup. No jewelry. Just the reality of consequence stitched into every seam. She looked older. Smaller. Like guilt had whittled her down from the inside. She sat down across from me without saying a word, her eyes searching mine for something. Regret. Anger. A crack of sympathy. I didn't give her any. I came here to tell you something, I said, leaning forward slightly. I forgive you. Her breath caught. Not a sob. Just a hitch, like a woman who'd prepared for every version of this moment except kindness. I let the silence stretch. Let it settle into the room until it had weight. Then I added, but that doesn't mean I want to see you again. It doesn't mean we're fine. It just means I'm done letting what you did live rent-free in my head. Angela reached for my hand across the table. I didn't move. I never stopped loving you, she said, voice hoarse. Even when everything fell apart, I kept thinking about what we had. What we had, I said quietly, was a story you ended. She nodded slowly. Didn't cry. Didn't beg. Just stared down at the table, her fingers twitching like they still needed something to hold on to. Camille's getting worse, she whispered. She doesn't remember half of what she did. Some days she thinks she's still in law school. She made her bed, I said, and you fluffed the pillows. That was all. I stood up, nodded to the guard, and walked away without looking back. I didn't need to. Some chapters don't deserve rereading. Some faces are best remembered in the rearview mirror. The next few weeks were quiet, almost eerily so. I'd moved into my new place downtown. A sleek penthouse with cold stone counters, black steel fixtures, and windows that drank in the skyline. It didn't feel like home yet, but it felt honest. No fake warmth. No photos on the wall of people who smiled while sharpening knives. Just space. Air. The kind of quiet that doesn't come with suspicion. I bought new furniture. Hired new staff. Got a dog. A black lab named Ranger. He doesn't care about company shares or trust funds. He just wants to be walked, fed, and left alone on the couch. I understand him. There were consequences, of course. The kind that linger after the headlines fade. Some former friends never called again. Some business partners treated me like damaged goods. Too much baggage. Too much scandal. One even hinted that I should take a step back. Let someone else be the face for a while, he said. Give the press a chance to forget. I told him to find someone else to admire, then walked out of that meeting without shaking his hand. If surviving betrayal makes people uncomfortable, that's their problem. I'm not here to make betrayal more palatable. But not all the fallout was bad. Some people saw what happened and respected it. One board member, a woman who'd known me since my early days, took me aside and said, "You handled that with more dignity than most men I know." Another sent me a book, The Art of Not Giving a Damn. No note, just the title. I read the first few chapters and laughed for the first time in months. And then, slowly, things began to settle. Not into what they were, but into what they should have been all along. I stopped checking the news. Stopped replaying the dinner in my head. Stopped waiting for the other shoe to drop. Because I'd already walked through the wreckage and come out clean. Not untouched, but clean. I never saw Camille again. Never visited. Never sent a letter. Angela wrote once, some long apology filled with memories and half-confessions. I read it once, then burned it. Not out of anger. Just because some stories don't belong in drawers. They belong in ash. One evening, months later, I hosted a small dinner for my closest friends. Just 6 people. Good wine. Honest laughter. Nothing fancy. Nothing performative. Just people who had shown up when it counted. One of them raised a toast halfway through the night and said, "To cutting the cancer out." Everyone laughed. I did too. Not because it was harsh, but because it was true. When the night ended and I stood alone on the balcony, city lights winking below, I realized something. I hadn't just survived them. I had survived myself. The version of me that tolerated too much, forgave too quickly, hoped too hard. That man was gone. In his place stood someone quieter, harder, but not colder. Just wiser. Just free. When betrayal strikes from the people closest to you, Forgiveness isn't about giving them a pass. It's about reclaiming your peace. Would you have made the same call or walked away with no closure at all? Let me know in the comments. And if this story hit a nerve, subscribe for more real-life reckonings that prove some family wounds cut deeper than strangers ever could. See you soon in the next story.